As we head into late fall, we're starting to see those very deep, wound-up extratropical cyclones, and a very large one off the northwest coast. Now, this storm was by no means a surprise. We talked about this back on Monday, and I might have pointed it out back on Friday. It is a meteorological bomb. Reportedly, the pressure dropped to 942 millibars offshore last night, tying a record set in 2021. At one point, we had over 600,000 people in Washington without power. At this very moment, 427,000 outages being reported, 358,000 in the Seattle area. There's an even closer look at it. Those satellite images are very spectacular. Thunder is being reported on the Washington coast, Quileute, Washington, getting some of that deep cold core convection. Let's roll those graphics back to Monday. This is how things looked. This is isobars and thickness. And there we have a baroclinic zone off of Oregon and Northern California. There comes our system of interest. So we go into Monday night and Tuesday morning. Rapid deepening of this system. By afternoon yesterday, we were down into the 950s and the 940s by evening. So this is going to be about 24 hours ago. The main baroclinic zone shifting to the south. That's where we find the cold front and the warm front. And everything up north is part of an occlusion. So here we are at peak strength. The coastal areas being lashed by these bands of rain and the strong pressure gradients. And we go into the overnight hours and into this morning. We're left with this occlusion off of Washington, and it slowly starts filling. Let's take a look at that surface map. We've got a warm sector extending all the way into Virginia, cold front moving through the eastern states, and an occlusion in the Allegheny Mountain region into the Great Lakes. In Texas, we've got a modifying polar air mass. Rather cool temperatures, 50s and 60s, and very dry air. If you look at those dew points, they're down into the teens and 20s, and it gets even drier as you go to the west. In the Four Corners area, dew point of -9 at Farmington, 7 at Flagstaff, and 7 at Las Vegas. That is a very dry air mass. Typically, we don't see those values down below 0 like we see here. On the west coast, there's our Pacific weather system, baroclinic zone off of California, helping to support this area of heavy rain. And in the Sierras and the Shasta Mountain region, we do have a winter storm ongoing, and that extends up the Cascades. There's our culprit out there west of Washington. It's showing 976 on this chart, but there is some smoothing going on, so don't take that literally. But the position, yeah, that's going to be accurate. Further up north in Alaska, we've got another winter storm. And one thing that's rather significant is the appearance of Arctic air across the Northwest Territories and Yukon. Temperatures dropping close to -20 Fahrenheit, and the pressures rising up to about 1050 millibars. So that does mark a change in the seasons. That's typically something we see during the depths of winter. Across Alaska itself, mild air. Look at those temperatures, 30 to 32, as far north as Barrow. That contrasts quite a bit with the Yukon, and that's because of strong, warm advection. That's responsible for some of this fog along the west coast, and then further up north, a little bit of freezing rain on the west coast. In Canada itself, another polar air mass moving south, single digits into Alberta and Saskatchewan, with snow all the way down towards North Dakota. On the east coast, however, you can see the effects of widespread warm advection, 30s filtering into Labrador, into Quebec, and all the way into western Hudson Bay. 34 up there at Fort Severn. I think that's Fort Severn. I'm not sure what stations those are. But further south, colder and snow. So a little bit of a flip-flopped appearance on the weather map. And it's easy to get fixated on those details at the surface. We need to keep track of what's going on in the upper levels. This shows the jet stream configuration. Very high amplitude on the west coast. There's the vertically stacked extratropical system off of Washington. And just to the east, we've got a 140-knot jet. That's going to be a polar front jet coming onshore in southern Oregon. And, of course, that's producing quite a bit of weather in that part of the country. We've got ridging across the Rockies, and we pick up another trough through the Ohio River Valley, down into the southern states, another ridge further out to the east, and downstream from these ridges, those tend to be areas of rather quiet weather. Downstream from troughs, however, such as this area right here, this area there, that's going to be areas of active weather that tends to support upward vertical motion. This time of the year, we are dealing with atmospheric rivers, and you can see just how far south this one on the west coast is. It's coming on shore around San Francisco up to Fort Bragg, well south of that very deep low up to the north. And another mild atmospheric river on the east coast, flowing up towards New Jersey. So let's focus on the one on the west coast. We go up through tomorrow afternoon. Yeah, there's another punch coming in for the northwest coast for later Thursday into Friday. And then by Friday afternoon, most of that is gone, and we're left with the tail end across San Francisco and Sacramento. And then we go into the weekend, moisture starting to filter north across Texas. That's tropical air moving northward, onshore flow in the western Gulf for Sunday and into Monday, and that shifts into the Ohio River Valley for Monday. And then we go into the rest of the week, and things are a little bit drier. More moisture coming up for late week ahead of another cold front moving south. We're going to look at that shortly, and that moves rapidly into the southeastern U.S. So anytime we have this kind of moisture advection, we need to kind of be on guard for the possibility of severe weather. Most of the significant weather events in the southeast, they happen during the cold season. And then we take a look at the Q vectors. Now, this is a little bit technical, so we're not going to spend too much time on this, but this does interest a lot of our viewers. Basically, the lowdown is the red areas indicate upward motion. We find clouds, higher relative humidity, precipitation, rain, snow, all of that. And then the blue areas, those are areas of subsidence or sinking motion. And there we find clearing, decreasing relative humidity, and warming in the column. Let's take a quick look at that forecast going into tonight. The main bear clinic zone moves northeast into New York and Pennsylvania. Out to the west, however, very large upper level low, instability, and little spokes of upward motion rotating around the low pressure area. So that'll keep that entire region unsettled. Ridging out to the west, and then on the Pacific coast, we've got other short waves moving into Oregon and Washington, and which take this into Thursday and Friday. Yeah, definitely unsettled on the East Coast. Very quiet weather in the Rockies and central U.S., but the West Coast continuing to get lashed by these waves moving in from the Pacific. There's a big one for later on Friday moving into Northern California, and by Saturday morning, heading up into the Northern Rockies. Let's take a quick look at the weather around the country, starting with the Northeast. We're looking at the infrared imagery because it is nighttime there. But we do see those bands of frontal activity from West Virginia up to the Great Lakes. Highs today across the Northeast, they were mostly in the 50s, with 60s further to the south, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, right around 60 degrees. We do have an assortment of winter storm watches and winter weather advisories all the way from New York through central Pennsylvania down into eastern West Virginia. This is mostly in the higher elevations. There could be 4 inches in the mountain valleys with up to 8 inches in the mountains and possibly 12 inches in some areas of central Pennsylvania down into West Virginia. In the southeastern states this afternoon, we were looking at 60s in North Carolina to 70s and 80s further to the south. There's a wind advisory overnight in the Blue Ridge Mountains, northwest winds gusting to 45 miles an hour, and we've got lake wind advisories through tomorrow in central South Carolina into the Augusta area. Then, for Thursday and Friday, winter weather advisory all through the Great Smoky Mountain region, 1 to 3 inches of snow possible, with 3 to 5 inches in the mountains. And we've also got a freeze watch for central North Carolina overnight Thursday night down to 28 degrees. That includes Raleigh, Greensboro, Winston-Salem, Rocky Mount, and Rockingham. For the southern plains, a cool day, highs in the 50s as far south as Memphis, Oklahoma City, Midland, and in the 60s all the way down to Houston and Austin. 70s do remain on the coast. Wind advisory in southwestern Louisiana expiring right about now. We did have north winds gusting to 35 miles an hour. And as we head into nighttime, you can see the warm lakes start to emerge right there, right there. That used to be a very good technique for finding stratus. When the stratus moves inland, often it's hard to see on infrared imagery, but you start seeing the lakes disappear one by one. And that tells you that a stratus layer is on the way. But we've got better tools now, such as the NT microphysics, and that'll definitely pick up those stratus layers. So those old days of trying to forecast by lakes disappearing, that's pretty much over. Some of you probably saw the SpaceX launch yesterday. Well, surprisingly, it was visible on GOES satellite imagery. If you look down there at the southern tip of Texas on the coast, little puff of smoke on the GOES 16 imagery. We don't have any rocket launches in the northern plains to talk about. However, in North Dakota, blizzard warning. That is expiring right about now, but they were looking for blowing snow, winds up to 60 miles an hour in Devil's Lake over to Minot. Surrounding that, a very large winter weather advisory, Williston, Bismarck, Fargo, Grand Forks, Thief River Falls, 2 inches of snow with 50-mile-an-hour winds. High wind warnings all the way down towards Nebraska, South Dakota, winds out of the northwest up to 60 miles an hour. In the southwestern U.S., looking at the visible imagery, still some snow cover on the ground around the Palmer Divide out towards Lyman and Kit Carson. The next Pacific weather system overspreading the Great Basin area into the Great Salt Lake, but the rest of the southwestern U.S. under that very dry air mass. And then we move into California. We get into the atmospheric river that we pointed out earlier. We do have winter storm warnings till 10 p.m. in the northern Sierras, Mount Shasta, the Salmon Mountains, up to 6 inches of wet snow, mostly above 3,000 feet, and flood watches through Saturday morning all across the northern San Joaquin Valley and northwestern California. Then for the northwestern U.S., there's the other end of that warm conveyor belt spreading across Oregon and Washington. Winter storm warning expired this afternoon in the southern Cascades above 4,000. They were expecting 3 inches of heavy wet snow. Winter weather advisory also expired for Klamath Falls. We do have high wind warnings continuing through tonight for Altamont and Lakeview up to 50 miles an hour. Flood warnings run through Thursday night on the southwestern Oregon coast into the Siskiyous. The beaches and coast areas remain hazardous due to high surf and rip currents from that weather system all wound up off the coast and the strong cold advection onshore wind component hitting the west coast. Winter storm warnings and winter weather advisories continue in northern Washington through this evening and run overnight into the northern Idaho mountains around Sandpoint to Missoula and in Glacier National Park. Let's go ahead and take a look at that forecast going into tonight. A big chunk of cold air moving into the Midwest region and the Great Lakes. There it is for tomorrow. Snow showers spreading across much of the upper Ohio Valley. Highs will be in the 30s from Pittsburgh to Cincinnati and Indianapolis. Remaining bitterly cold up there in North Dakota, highs in the 20s once again. But in the southwestern U.S., heating up into the 80s, looking for a high of 83 at Phoenix and 82 at Tucson. Continued rainy throughout much of the northern California region, snows continuing in the higher elevations. Then we go into Friday. Cold air mass continues to filter into the remainder of the northeast region. A occluded front moving into Quebec and Ontario. Highs will be mostly in the 40s, with 30s in the Appalachian region in the higher elevations. Snow throughout the Allegheny Mountains, the Catskills, the Adirondacks, but it should remain rain in the lower elevations. North Dakota remains in the deep freeze. Snow begins advancing southward on Friday into Montana. Then we go into Saturday. Texas gets a warm-up as we get that onshore component off the western Gulf. Cold air mass advances into the Great Basin area. Highs drop from the 40s and 50s down into the 30s and 40s in many areas. Rain all through the coastal regions, with widespread mountain snows in the higher elevations inland. Then we go into Sunday. Texas will get quite warm up into the 80s from Houston to Dallas. San Antonio looking at 83 degrees. Up to the north, a cold blast coming south through the Dakotas and Montana. Highs drop from the 30s and 40s down into the teens and 20s. Looking at 19 for a high at Great Falls, 12 for Cut Bank. And in the western U.S., much colder. Looking for a high of 44 at Salt Lake City and 44 at Boise. We go into Monday. More cold air filters southward. And I'm just going to go ahead and advance this through the remainder of the week. The important day, of course, will be Thursday. That, of course, is Thanksgiving. Looks cold across much of the country into the southeastern U.S., mild conditions in the Rockies, and warm in Arizona and southern California. Another Pacific weather system moving into northern California and Nevada, but it looks a little bit warmer. Most of the snow will be confined to the Sierras. There's Thursday evening. Start to see some rain developing in Dallas, Oklahoma City. And then we go into Friday. Looks like a snowstorm developing in the northern plains. That's a pretty good punch of cold air, so things could be looking quite cold for next weekend. And that's all I've got for this episode of Forecast Lab. Hope you have a great Wednesday night. Take care, and we'll see you back here on Friday. Bye-bye.